Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ryan Widmer. Ryan Widmer, a young athlete, was convicted of a horrific crime and is serving a life sentence with parole eligibility in 2025, over 10 years after the tragedy occurred. He is now fighting to overturn his conviction. The case has garnered widespread public attention across 3 neighboring states, sparking controversy surrounding his guilt. The unusual circumstances of Sarah Widmer's death and the lack of a clear motive for the crime have made this case highly controversial. Ryan and Sarah met at a local cafe they both frequented. When Ryan ordered a cup of coffee, Sarah noticed a book on his table that she had recently read. This shared interest in literature sparked a conversation that lasted several hours, covering topics such as books, movies, music, and their common interests. As they learned more about each other, they discovered a shared love for nature, traveling, and animals. With each successive meeting, their relationship grew closer and more trusting, eventually blossoming into true love. After a few months, Ryan and Sarah's relationship blossomed, and he proposed to her during a romantic dinner at the same cafe where they first met. Overjoyed, Sarah accepted his proposal. The young couple set a wedding date and began searching for a beautiful 2-story house in Hamilton. On April 10, 2008, they exchanged vows in a quaint and intimate church ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Sarah brought every detail to life, making the day truly unforgettable. She stunned in her white dress, leaving Ryan spellbound. Following the grand banquet, which was met with thunderous applause and joyful cheers, they embarked on a 2-week honeymoon to the Hawaiian Islands, where they reveled in each other's company and the breathtaking natural beauty. The young couple, deeply in love, had made plans for a future together, filled with hopes and dreams of starting a family. However, fate had other plans. On Monday, August 11, 2008, after Sarah finished her shift at the dental clinic, she met Ryan at her favorite cafe. They had dinner together, engaging in lively conversation, and afterwards walked home, where Sarah began sorting out the groceries she had bought. She then sat down on the couch, and Ryan handed her a glass of water and a pill, as she had complained of a headache during dinner. They spent the rest of the evening watching their favorite TV show, exchanging gentle kisses, and eventually, Sarah headed upstairs to the bedroom. She undressed, neatly folding her clothes, prepared a towel, lit scented candles, and put on her favorite music. Meanwhile, Ryan stayed downstairs, flipping channels on the TV remote, briefly stopping at a soccer game, and lying on the couch for about 10 minutes. He called out to Sarah over the soft music, but she didn't respond. Ryan slowly made his way upstairs, entered the bedroom, and turned on the TV. He called out to Sarah again, but was met with silence. Panic started to set in, and he rushed to the bathroom, where he found Sarah lying face down in the tub. Ryan immediately pulled the plug and grabbed the phone to call emergency services. At 10:49 p.m., the service recorded the call, with Ryan frantically yelling that his wife had drowned in the bathtub, likely having fallen asleep. In his panic, Ryan failed to follow the dispatcher's instructions, wasting precious time. Under the dispatcher's careful guidance, Ryan eventually managed to pull Sarah out of the tub and performed CPR on her repeatedly. The ambulance, accompanied by police officers, arrived at the Widmer home just 6 minutes after the call. The police were initially drawn to the scene of the tragedy. Upon inspection, the bathroom appeared clean and dry, with no signs of water or scattered supplies that would indicate a hasty removal of a body from the water. The bathroom was meticulously clean. Sarah lay on the bedroom floor, nude with dry skin, but her wet hair suggested drowning. The bedroom was also tidy, leading law enforcement to suspect murder. Ryan, wearing only his underwear, was thrashing about the bedroom. When medical professionals found no pulse, they began performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. A pinkish-white discharge from Sarah's nose and mouth confirmed drowning. Medical staff attempted to intubate Sarah twice as she lay on the bedroom floor, but both attempts failed. She was then rushed to an ambulance, where 2 more attempts were made to revive her heart using a defibrillator, again without success. Throughout the ordeal, Ryan remained by his wife's side, visibly distraught and anxious, as described by medical staff. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the hospital, medical staff attempted to revive Sarah, but at 11:41 p.m., an emergency physician pronounced her dead. Ryan, overcome with grief, fell to his knees in the hospital hallway and wept. The sudden tragedy that occurred just 4 months after the wedding sent shockwaves throughout the city, and Ryan became the prime suspect in the murder of his young wife. Ryan's initial statement, given at the hospital, raised doubts about its accuracy. He claimed that only he and his wife were at home, and that nothing out of the ordinary had happened. They had dinner at a cafe, returned home, and watched TV together. Sarah had a headache, and he gave her painkillers and helped her to the bathroom when he found her. However, the emergency call record showed that the victim was lying face down, contradicting Ryan's account. The man was distraught, repeatedly calling out for Sarah. Under pressure from the investigator, Ryan shifted from being a victim to a participant in the investigation, working to uncover what had happened to Sarah that night. He agreed to let investigators search their house. Analysis of the medication Sarah took revealed it was a common painkiller, but it was discovered that Sarah's frequent headaches and migraines had led her to take a course of drugs that altered her hormonal balance, causing uncontrollable sleep. This became the initial theory behind Sarah's death. After searching the house, police found bloodstains on the carpet. When they arrived, the bathtub was dry and there were no wet towels. The tile floor was also dry and clean, leading police to suspect that Sarah had been murdered. No wet items, clothing, or other objects were found in the house that could have been used to soak up water. Ryan's statements during the 911 call and at the hospital were contradictory, which raised suspicions and turned him from a victim into a suspect. An examination of Sarah's body revealed bruises on her forehead, neck, armpit, and upper lip, as well as lacerations on her upper lip. However, there was no clear evidence of a struggle, as her fingernails were not broken or chipped, and there were no marks on her hands, elbows, or knees. Ryan's body also showed no signs of injury or struggle. An investigation by Sheriff Bishop was inconclusive, as all the bathroom supplies were in place, and there were no signs of resistance. It was unclear whether Sarah had taken a bath that evening, or if she had not resisted and allowed her husband to drown her. Sarah's autopsy, led by Dr. Russell Apt Grove, revealed that the cause of death was drowning, accompanied by multiple muscle hemorrhages in the front of her neck and contusions on her scalp. These injuries, which occurred before her death, raised many questions, but their origin remained unknown. The investigation struggled to make progress with no leads or answers. The toxicology tests found no traces of illicit or alcoholic substances in Sarah's blood. On August 13, 2008, Ryan was arrested on suspicion of aggravated murder of his wife. The decision was based on the discrepancies in the emergency call and the crime scene, as well as the injuries found on Sarah's body. This evidence was sufficient to charge him with her murder by drowning. Despite Ryan and Sarah's seemingly perfect relationship, with friends and neighbors testifying to their deep love for each other, and their public displays of affection, no one could understand what drove them to such a tragic end. In March 2009, the first court hearing took place. Ron Cronenberger, the emergency dispatcher who received the call, testified as a witness. He described Ryan as remaining calm during their conversation, stating that it seemed like Ryan was pretending to perform CPR by blowing into the tube. The prosecution argued that the 911 call, the crime scene, and Sarah's injuries provided sufficient evidence to prove Ryan's guilt. They alleged that Ryan had forcibly drowned Sarah by holding her underwater in a bathtub. The bathtub was a crucial piece of evidence in the case. Upon examination, police found fingerprint streaks, supposedly left by human hands, closer to the middle of the tub. Using a reflected ultraviolet imaging process, fingerprints and smears were detected on the tub. A forearm print was identified, and a hair follicle test revealed that it was left by an adult male, although the exact age of the print could not be determined. However, the bathtub was not the critical evidence needed to prove the struggle between Ryan and Sarah. The prosecution suggested to the jury that a violent altercation likely occurred that night at the Widmer home for unknown reasons, and that the suspect deliberately kept quiet about it. The defense team called in an expert to testify that it is highly unlikely for someone to fall asleep and drown in a bathtub unless they were under the influence of illegal drugs or alcohol. The expert explained that the sensation of water on the face would normally wake a person up or trigger a gag reflex, causing them to cough or choke. Even if the person didn't wake up, the lack of oxygen would eventually rouse them. The pathologist who performed the autopsy testified that if Sarah's body was dry, but her hair was wet, it could indicate that her head was forcibly pushed off the edge of a bathtub, toilet, or sink. This could have happened while her head was facing forward or backward, whether the water was running or the bathtub was full. The prosecution argued that Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, making him guilty of the crime. On the other hand, the defense argued that Ryan was innocent, primarily because there was no clear motive for the alleged crime. They pointed out that if there had been a violent struggle, as the prosecution claimed, there would be evidence of it. However, there were no injuries on Ryan, and Sarah's fingernails showed no signs of breaking or chipping, suggesting that there was no struggle. They claimed that the injuries found on Sarah were caused by the prolonged CPR, direct cardiac massage, and repeated intubation attempts made that night at the house, in the ambulance, and at the hospital. At the defense's request, Dr. Werner Spitz performed a second autopsy on Sarah. He confirmed that the cause of death was drowning and observed injuries to her neck, arms, upper lip, skull, a lacerated liver, and bleeding on her neck. However, he couldn't determine whether these injuries occurred during CPR. It was argued that the EMTs tried to resuscitate Sarah for about 45 minutes and that the deep neck bleeding likely resulted from an IV inserted in that area. The EMTs had been unable to access her arm veins. Instead of ruling it a homicide, Dr. Spitz concluded that Sarah's death was undetermined. The defense based their case on the fact that Sarah's skin was dry, which dries faster than her hair. They conducted experiments to demonstrate that when Ryan found his wife unconscious, he instinctively pulled the drain plug to try and help her and then called emergency services. This sequence of events explains why her body was drier than expected. The water had already drained from the bathtub by the time Ryan called 911. An expert witness demonstrated that a person can dry off in as little as 7 minutes after emerging from the water. A second court hearing was set for May 2010. Ryan's father, Gary, claimed that the prosecution had obtained DNA results showing that Sarah had the disease, but the prosecutor refused to disclose them, believing they wouldn't have changed the jury's verdict. However, it remains uncertain whether the jury's decision would have been different if they had received reliable evidence about Sarah's medical condition, which could have contributed to her drowning. The official reason for denying a retrial was the jury's errors in their investigation. Despite another unsuccessful court hearing, Ryan remained incarcerated. The Widmer family received an unwelcome shock when Jennifer Cruz arrived at the prosecutor's office to testify against Ryan, claiming he was guilty. She identified herself as a friend of Ryan's, stating that they had regular communication via phone or email. According to Jennifer, Ryan contacted her on October 26, 2009 at 11:09 p.m. and his voice was highly distressed. He confided in her, saying that he had assaulted Sarah in the living room on the day she died. The trigger for the altercation was Sarah's discovery of Ryan's infidelity, leading to a prolonged argument that started downstairs and continued in the bedroom. Ryan pushed Sarah into the bathroom, leaving her without checking on her well-being. After calming down, he found Sarah floating lifelessly in the full bathtub. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Ryan allegedly wiped the water from the bathroom floor using towels and concocted a story about the accident. However, Ryan's defense team vigorously disputed Jennifer's testimony, pointing out several inconsistencies. The lawyers argued that Jennifer's account was implausible, as no wet towels were found anywhere in the house, including the dryer. Furthermore, there was no evidence of infidelity in Ryan and Sarah's marriage. The family was financially stable, and they never quarreled. Ryan's friends described him as a kind, helpful, and even-tempered person who never displayed anger. Additionally, Ryan stood to gain nothing from Sarah's death, as they did not have a life insurance policy. Before the third trial, Jennifer Cruz's credibility was called into question, and she was prevented from testifying as a witness. This was partly due to evidence of her past infidelities and petty theft convictions. Additionally, a phone call in which Ryan allegedly confessed to her was not corroborated. In January 2011, a new trial was held, prompted by the discovery of fresh evidence. The defense presented a medical opinion suggesting that Sarah's sudden loss of consciousness and subsequent drowning might have been caused by her underlying medical condition. Medical experts testified that Sarah's existing cardiac or neurological defects could have led to her losing consciousness, but the state's medical experts disputed these claims. Sarah's co-workers revealed that she often slept in her car before starting her shift at the dental clinic, and that she frequently suffered from allergies and stomach pains. On the day of her death, Sarah mentioned to her co-worker, Dr. Benjamin Mesmer, that she was experiencing a headache and stomach pain. Later that evening, a friend spoke with Sarah, observing that she looked extremely tired and complained of a headache and neck pain. Sarah's friends were aware of her ability to fall asleep easily in unexpected places, with one even speculating that she might have had narcolepsy. However, Sarah's mother testified that her daughter did not have any sleep disorders and was a healthy child who regularly underwent medical examinations, which showed she was in perfect health. The defense argued that Sarah's death was not caused by forced drowning because she didn't have any injuries to the small bones of her neck or defensive wounds on her arms and legs. Although the defense couldn't explain how Sarah died, an emergency medicine expert testified that every year, approximately 300,000 people die suddenly in the United States, and in about 33% of those cases, autopsy results are normal and show no underlying medical conditions. After deliberating for 12 hours, the jury found Ryan guilty of murder and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Basing their decision on the fact that Sarah's body was not wet, Ryan's past history, and their belief that he had staged his 911 call. Ryan's family has passionately defended him, and the case, which dates back over 10 years, continues to unite like-minded individuals who hope to clear his name through DNA testing. While genetic material often plays a crucial role in resolving disputed charges and exonerations in cases involving unexplained deaths, what sets this case apart is the unusual request for the victim's DNA, rather than the person convicted. Unfortunately, a Warren County judge has already rejected Ryan Widmer's request to have the victim's DNA tested. Mike Allen, a former Hamilton prosecutor, noted that after listening to all 3 trials, he never found a clear motive, which is unusual in a murder case. However, the prosecutor is not required to prove motive, which makes this case even more peculiar. Ryan Widmer is awaiting a federal court decision on a motion for his release. He has been imprisoned for 14 years, and his first opportunity for release will be in July 2025 unless a federal judge rules in his favor. According to University of Cincinnati law professor Donald Custer, who also works with the Ohio Innocence Project, proving innocence is not enough to be exonerated. There must be evidence of a constitutional error in the judicial process. In 2025, Widmer will be eligible for parole, but his lawyers believe it's unlikely he'll be granted parole because the parole board tends to favor inmates who express remorse, whereas Widmer maintains his innocence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sarah Ann Wood. Sarah Ann Wood was born on March 4, 1981 in New York. Raised in a devout family, her father served as a pastor in a small town in the state's middle. From a young age, Sarah, along with her older sister and brother, attended services at her father's church and Sunday school. Dancing was her passion, poetry brought her joy, and she was an enthusiastic member of her school's cheerleading team. Sarah loved nothing more than riding her bike, often using it to get to her father's church, less than a mile from home, for services, Sunday school, or to lend her father a hand. On August 18, 1993, when Sarah was 12, she rode her bike to church for Sunday school, following her usual routine. With her father staying home, the classes were conducted by other church members. Her parents expected her to return immediately after the classes, but as time passed and she failed to appear, they grew increasingly anxious. After waiting a little longer, they headed to the church, thinking Sarah might have lingered behind with friends, but she was nowhere to be found. The Sunday school teachers reported that she had departed on her bike soon after classes, taking with her a few books, some colorful folders, and a small display board. Her parents' concern escalated because the ride home from church should have taken only a few minutes, and it was unlikely Sarah would have gone elsewhere with all those items. Moreover, she always sought permission before deviating from her routine. Her parents retraced the route to the church, inquiring with neighbors if anyone had seen their daughter, leveraging the small town's familiarity and Sarah's father's church connections. Dozens of people quickly joined the search, and they soon found a witness who had seen Sarah riding towards her house around 2:30 p.m., just a few hundred yards from her home. This sighting only intensified her parents' anxiety, convinced that something had indeed happened to Sarah, prompting them to contact the police. The local police department swiftly launched a search operation, deploying dozens of officers to scour the area. The sheriff also requested assistance from the fire department, and they joined forces to aid in the search. News of Sarah's disappearance spread rapidly throughout the community, prompting dozens of volunteers to join the effort. Within the first few hours, several hundred people were involved in the search. The police concentrated on the route from the church to Sarah's home, meticulously searching the fields and woods on both sides of the road. Their efforts soon yielded a disturbing discovery. Just a few yards into the woods, they found Sarah's bike leaning against a tree. The police centered their focus on that area and quickly uncovered the items Sarah had brought from Sunday school, hidden beneath a nearby bush. These findings led investigators to a grim inference. It was likely that Sarah had been abducted. They theorized that an unknown assailant might have dragged her from the road into the woods, left her belongings behind, and then taken her away in a vehicle. The police department launched an all-out search effort, pouring all its resources into finding Sarah. Meanwhile, her restless relatives took matters into their own hands, printing flyers with details of her disappearance and distributing them not only in their hometown, but also in surrounding cities, with the help of dozens of volunteers. Despite their collective efforts, the first day's search yielded nothing. Police and volunteers scoured the area within a several-mile radius of the road until nightfall, but no new leads emerged. The search resumed the next morning, with even more people joining the effort. The state police also joined the investigation, focusing on identifying a potential suspect. Investigators questioned every resident in town, hoping someone might have spotted a suspicious stranger or vehicle linked to Sarah's disappearance. Sarah's parents set up an improvised headquarters, manned by dozens of volunteers, who printed and distributed flyers, scouring for witnesses or leads that could bring them closer to finding Sarah. As local media picked up the story, news of her disappearance spread nationwide within days. The police received over 1,000 tips, meticulously investigating each one, but repeatedly hit dead ends. Concerned residents helped the parents raise a substantial $150,000 reward for any information about Sarah's whereabouts. But unfortunately, this too yielded nothing. The active phase of the search continued for about a week before the police concluded they were unlikely to find valuable leads in the area. They shifted their focus to finding a potential suspect, scrutinizing local residents and convicted criminals from neighboring towns, but to no avail. Sarah's disappearance was featured on 2 popular national television shows, triggering a new wave of tips. Her parents made regular appeals to the public through the media, pleading for any information about their daughter's whereabouts, but her fate remained a mystery. This continued for nearly 6 months until a surprising breakthrough occurred. On the morning of January 7, 1994, 12-year-old Rebecca left her home in a small Massachusetts town and set out on her walk to school. As she strolled down a deserted street, she noticed a man walking alongside her. He attempted to speak, but Rebecca couldn't hear him due to her headphones. When she removed them, the man brandished a gun and warned her that if she obeyed his every command, he wouldn't harm her. He grasped her jacket, and they continued walking in the same direction. Rebecca was terrified to scream or attempt to flee, aware that even if she complied, the man might still kill her. As they walked, she quickly devised a plan. Feigning an asthma attack, she struggled to breathe and sat down on the ground. The man released her jacket, instead gripping the edge of her backpack as she continued to act as if she were suffocating. Seizing the moment, Rebecca slipped out of the backpack straps and sprinted away from her kidnapper. A few hundred yards away, she spotted several adults and rushed towards them, exclaiming that someone had just attempted to abduct her. Meanwhile, the kidnapper sped away in his car, taking Rebecca's backpack with him. One of the witnesses took it upon himself to tail the kidnapper in his own vehicle. After a few minutes, the witness pulled over at the nearest gas station and alerted the police. The witness was able to provide a partial license plate number and the car's model, while Rebecca gave a detailed description of the kidnapper's appearance. The police promptly launched a search for the vehicle, scouring databases for matching cars. They also sent out alerts to neighboring towns, and their efforts were rewarded that very evening. A patrol officer driving through a nearby small town spotted a vehicle matching the description. He pulled over and knocked on the door of the house where it was parked. Inside, he found several people, and upon inquiring about the pickup truck, the owner explained that he hadn't driven it in a while due to his loss of sight. He revealed that his neighbor, 43-year-old Lewis Lint, frequently borrowed the truck. Lewis, a handyman, assisted his blind neighbor with various household tasks in exchange for using the pickup truck. According to Lewis, he last drove the truck the previous day and hadn't used it since. Nonetheless, the officer asked him to come to the station for questioning, and Lewis complied. Despite his earlier denial, Lewis continued to insist that he hadn't used the pickup that day and had no involvement in the attempted abduction. He claimed to be a devout Christian who spent most of his free time at church and would never engage in such an act. While Lewis was at the station, the police took his photograph and presented it to Rebecca and other witnesses in a photo lineup alongside pictures of other men. Unanimously, they identified Lewis as the kidnapper. Investigators promptly obtained a warrant to search Lewis's house and the vehicles, including the pickup truck owned by his neighbor. Their search yielded a disturbing discovery: a small bag containing duct tape, a knife, children's sunglasses, and candy in Lewis's van, which was parked near their house. Additionally, the police found a gun and Rebecca's backpack inside the house. Investigators uncovered a shocking discovery: a large, secret room dug out beneath the house, still under construction. With this substantial evidence, the police arrested Lewis for the attempted abduction. Initially, he maintained his innocence, but soon decided to confess to everything. He admitted to traveling to Rebecca's town in search of a victim, bringing along his kidnapping bag that he always kept in his car. Lewis then explained the purpose of the secret room he was digging under his house, and his story left even the police stunned. He revealed that he planned to convert it into a fully equipped bunker where he intended to hold kidnapped victims captive. Lewis confessed to aiming to abduct 11 girls between the ages of 12 and 17 to satisfy his horrific fantasies. He added that until the room was completed, he didn't plan to keep his victims there for long, intending to kill them within a few days. In Lewis's house, the police also found a list of several names. Upon identifying these individuals, they realized they were all children living in close proximity to Lewis's home. Following his confession, Lewis was placed in jail awaiting trial for attempted abduction. Investigators continued to visit him to gather additional information, and during one of these visits, he unexpectedly confessed to another crime. Lewis revealed that 4 years prior, in October 1990, he was working as a janitor at a movie theater in the same town where he later attempted to kidnap Rebecca. On the evening of October 22nd, he left work and spotted 12-year-old James Bernardo riding his bike near the parking lot. Lewis instantly decided to abduct him, intending to assault him. Lewis offered James $5 to help set up chairs in the movie theater, and the boy agreed. Lewis led him to the empty theater where he bound him. He then drove his van closer to the entrance, dragged the boy and his bike inside, and took him to his home. He left the boy there and drove to a nearby lake to dispose of the bike by throwing it into the water. Lewis returned home and attempted to assault the boy, but was unsuccessful. Frustrated, he decided to dispose of the victim. He dragged him into his van and drove to a neighboring state, where he murdered the boy and left the body in the forest. A hunter soon discovered the body and reported it to the police. However, despite their efforts, detectives were unable to identify the culprit over the course of several years. Now, upon comparing Lewis's statement with the case materials, investigators discovered that he had provided an astonishing number of facts and details about the crime that perfectly mirrored reality. Following Lewis's confession, news of his case spread like wildfire throughout the country. Within just a few days, police realized they were dealing with a man who not only had attempted to abduct a girl and was building a secret bunker for other victims, but had also confessed to a murder that no one had suspected him of. New York investigators searching for Sarah Wood soon caught wind of Lewis's case. They delved into the details of Rebecca's attempted abduction and requested more information about Lewis himself. Interestingly, profilers had previously created a profile of Sarah's potential abductor, and Lewis seemed to fit it remarkably well. The investigators decided to pay him a visit and headed to the prison. During the interrogation, he revealed that frequent visits to the neighboring state were motivated by close family ties. Lewis also admitted that he would often drive through small towns in search of victims, and on August 18, 1993, he spotted Sarah walking along the road with her bike. According to his statement, he pulled up beside her, got out of the car, and forced her into the van at gunpoint. He then tied her up, dragged her belongings and bike into the nearby woods to conceal them, and drove her hundreds of miles to the mountains. In a remote area by a large lake, he assaulted and killed her, eventually burying her body in a hole. The police launched an extensive search effort around the lake, mobilizing hundreds of volunteers, park rangers, and the military. However, the vast size of the lake posed a significant challenge, making it nearly impossible to cover the entire area, even with such a large search team. Furthermore, with months having passed since the burial, the location could have become overgrown with vegetation. After weeks of searching, they were unable to find either the body or any evidence. Detailed testimony with precise details of the abduction was sufficient to charge Lewis with the murders of both Sarah and 12-year-old James. In January 1995, Lewis was sentenced to 17 to 20 years in prison for the attempted abduction of Rebecca. The following June, the trial for James's murder began, and Lewis pleaded guilty before the judge. He confided in his lawyer that he wanted to confess to Sarah's murder immediately. But when he entered the courtroom and saw her parents, he abruptly changed his mind. However, just 9 days later, when he was brought into an empty courtroom, he finally admitted his guilt. Despite this, he persisted in refusing to disclose the burial site, ignoring the desperate pleas from Sarah's parents. The prosecution offered Lewis a deal in exchange for information about Sarah's whereabouts. In return, they promised to serve his sentence in a state prison instead of a federal prison, as Lewis had requested. He agreed and began collaborating with investigators. Lewis identified a specific area near the lake and even sketched a rough map. Although the police wanted to take him along on the search, his lawyer cautioned against it. Undeterred, the police organized extensive searches in this area, braving the snow and freezing temperatures, with the help of hundreds of volunteers and heavy equipment. Despite their efforts, they were still unable to find Sarah. Several months later, with autumn's arrival, the police launched another attempt, but it ultimately proved unsuccessful. Throughout this period, detectives endeavored to extract more specific information from Lewis, but he persistently refused to divulge the exact location or assist the police in their search. Eventually, the prosecution opted to revoke the deal, and on April 11, 1997, Lewis was sentenced to 25 years in prison, the maximum sentence the judge could impose without the discovery of the body. The judge added that if such evidence were available, he would have certainly handed down a death sentence. During the trial, Lewis's lawyer attempted to mitigate the punishment in all 3 cases, without disputing his client's guilt. He argued that Lewis suffered from an unidentified mental disorder, citing claims of hearing voices in his head and alleged protection by aliens. However, experts found no evidence of any mental disease and concluded that Lewis was likely feigning these symptoms to avoid severe punishment. After the verdict, detectives persisted in visiting Lewis in prison, hoping to coax him into revealing Sarah's burial site. His behavior was erratic, and he provided contradictory information, naming different locations. On one occasion, he claimed he wasn't ready to disclose the location because he had buried Sarah alongside another victim, and he didn't want anyone to uncover the identity of this other person. Despite the emotional pleas of Sarah's parents, who also visited Lewis in prison, he remained resolute in his silence. The detectives were also exploring Lewis's potential involvement in other unsolved cases. Having confessed to the abductions of Sarah and James, the police had little doubt that he had additional victims. Almost immediately after his arrest, they uncovered another attempted abduction he had made several years prior. Lewis had tried to grab a girl off the street, but her father intervened, and they reported the incident to the police, although detectives couldn't identify the perpetrator until Lewis's photo appeared in the news. Lewis was also suspected of being involved in 4 unsolved disappearances between 1985 and 1992, and investigators concluded that he had the capability to commit these crimes, but no evidence was found, and Lewis refused to confess. Despite this, his story didn't end there. Detectives continued to visit him after his sentencing, hoping he would reveal Sarah's whereabouts or confess to other crimes. However, it wasn't until 2013 that Lewis suddenly had a change of heart and confessed to another murder. He admitted to being responsible for one of the crimes he was suspected of. According to Lewis, on November 6, 1992, he abducted a 16-year-old teenager with developmental disabilities who was riding a bike to his grandmother's house. He claimed to have forced the boy into his van, then killed him and dumped his body in a lake. Investigators confirmed his involvement based on his detailed description of the events, although official charges in the case have yet to be filed against him to this day. Currently, Lewis is 73 years old and remains incarcerated for 2 murders and an attempted abduction. Sarah's parents hold on to the hope that they will eventually persuade him to reveal the location of her burial site, or that he will divulge this secret before his death. In memory of Sarah, her relatives also organize an annual bike ride. Initially attended by just a few people, the event has grown steadily, with several thousand participants now regularly taking part. This event also helps raise significant funds to support efforts to locate missing children. The police are determined to find Sarah's burial site and are not giving up, even if Lewis is not willing to help them. They will keep searching the areas he has pointed out until they locate her body. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Diana D'Aiello. Diana D'Aiello was born in 1959 in a quiet suburb city of Los Angeles called Tustin. Her dad was in the military and her mom worked at a small clothing factory. When Diana was 19, she met a guy named Kevin Green. She was at a bar with her friend when some men started bothering them. He was being too pushy, so Kevin decided to step in. After he made the guy go away, Diana offered to buy him a drink to say thanks. A few days later, they went on a date, and things moved pretty fast from there. At the time, Kevin was already married, but he and his wife were in the process of getting divorced. Meanwhile, he and Diana moved in together, and she got pregnant. As soon as Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married the same day, eagerly awaiting the birth of their daughter. They rented an apartment in a small complex in Tustin. Kevin served in the Marines, working as a helicopter mechanic at the nearby base. Diana used to work with her mom at the clothing factory, but as her pregnancy progressed, she chose to stay at home and prepare for the arrival of their daughter. By the end of September 1979, Diana was 9.5 months pregnant and due to go to the hospital any day now. On the evening of September 30th, after watching a movie together, Diana and her husband got into an argument. The stress of impending parenthood had been weighing on both of them, so they'd been fighting quite a bit lately. Kevin decided to take a drive to a nearby fast food joint to clear his head and also avoid making the whole situation even worse. About 40 minutes later, a local police department received a chilling call. It was Kevin, and he said that someone had shot his wife and she needed an ambulance as soon as possible. A patrol car was nearby, and officers quickly arrived at the scene. On entering the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed in her bedroom, covered in blood, seemingly from a head wound resembling a gunshot. The bedroom wall was also splattered with blood. Diana showed signs of life, trying to breathe, so the officers started performing first aid while they waited for the ambulance. They also asked Kevin to leave the room as they were still unsure of what had happened. The medics soon arrived and carefully moved Diana into the ambulance. At first, they also thought she had a gunshot wound, but they quickly realized it wasn't the case. The wound appeared to be caused by blunt force trauma. Kevin wanted to go with his wife, but the police didn't allow him to. They needed to take his statement, and at that moment, they were considering all possible scenarios, including his involvement in the attack. Kevin was clearly in shock and seemed to struggle to comprehend the officer's words. He even attempted to get into the ambulance, so they had to stop him as it drove away. He began to regain his composure and finally told the police what had happened that night. Kevin explained that he and his wife had an argument, so he decided to go to a fast food joint to get burgers and clear his head. When he left the apartment, he realized he had left his keys inside, but he chose not to go back for them. He simply shut the door and headed to his car. Kevin also mentioned that not far from their apartment complex, he saw a van with its back door open and there was an African-American man walking back and forth to it. Given that it was around 2 a.m., Kevin found it a bit unusual. He drove to his favorite fast food place, but there was a long line, so he went to another one of the same chain a few miles away. He bought some burgers and headed home, which took about 40 minutes. When he got to the front door, Kevin found it wide open. He rushed inside and heard strange sounds like someone snoring. Upon entering the bedroom, he saw Diana covered in blood, struggling to breathe, and immediately called the police. Some parts of Kevin's story immediately raised questions for the officers. For example, his decision to go for burgers in the middle of the night seemed odd, and the whole trip also took him about 40 minutes. which was quite long considering that all the restaurants were close to his home. Nevertheless, officers inspected the fast food bag, and the food was still warm. The receipt contained the restaurant's address and the time of purchase, corroborating his account. Based on this, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but first, they had asked him to provide a blood sample. DNA analysis wasn't available at the time, but experts could compare the blood traces found at the crime scene with Kevin's blood type. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors confirmed that the wound on her head was not from a gunshot. Most likely, the assailant used a small but heavy object, like a piece of wood, and inflicted a series of blows. At the hospital, Diana slipped into a coma, and doctors worked tirelessly for several hours to save both the woman and her unborn child. They eventually managed to stabilize Diana's condition, but she still needed surgery. Meanwhile, investigators asked medical experts to determine if Diana had been sexually assaulted. Diana's position when found made officers consider this possibility. The experts later confirmed this, finding semen traces on her body. However, there were complications. Kevin had told detectives they were intimate a few hours before the argument, but DNA analysis was unavailable then. So despite having a biological sample from the perpetrator, little could be accomplished. Kevin and Diana's relatives spent the entire night at the hospital, hoping Diana and her baby could survive the attack. However, by morning, something unexpected happened. One of the monitors detected a sharp deterioration in the baby's condition, and despite the extensive efforts of the doctors, the baby didn't survive. As for Diana, medics performed surgery immediately after the baby's death, and her condition was stabilized. She remained in a coma, but her chances of survival were now considered high. However, doctors didn't expect her to return to a normal life after such serious trauma. Detectives worked tirelessly to track down the perpetrator who attacked Diana. After her baby passed away, the case was classified as a homicide, and the local police department put all their resources into it. Despite Kevin providing an alibi, detectives didn't rush to rule him out as a suspect. His story raised numerous questions due to his argument with his wife, leaving the front door unlocked, and being absent for an extended period for a supposed quick trip to the fast food joint. His claim of seeing a suspicious man near the house in the middle of the night also seemed too convenient, but there was no evidence against Kevin. The police already had another suspect when crimes with a similar modus operandi had started happening in Tustin and its surrounding areas about a year before. In December 1978, an unknown perpetrator broke into the apartment of a 17-year-old girl, struck her with a piece of wood, and sexually assaulted her, resulting in her death. 4 months later, the same happened to a 21-year-old woman. Someone broke into her home, struck her with a piece of wood, and she didn't survive either. In July 1979, the unknown perpetrator entered another woman's apartment and did the same, but she managed to survive. However, the victim spent several weeks in a coma due to her injuries, and her subsequent testimony didn't lead detectives to finding the attacker. In September 1979, less than a month before Diana's attack, the same happened to a 31-year-old woman who died the next day. Her son provided investigators with a description of the assailant, but the man still couldn't be identified. All these crimes had important similarities, similar to the attack on Diana. Police were almost sure that they were dealing with a serial killer, and they were putting all their effort into catching this person. He had already been given a nickname, the bedroom basher, as the criminal was committing his crimes with short breaks and was active in a relatively small suburban area of Los Angeles. Detectives thought he might strike again soon, so they decided to use the media to warn all women who lived alone, especially those in lower-floor apartments, as they seemed to be the preferred targets of the suspected serial killer. This caused widespread panic. Women started buying any form of protection they could find, enrolling in self-defense classes, and staying with friends and family in an effort to protect themselves from the dangerous criminal. Police also started patrolling the streets at night. Detectives interviewed anyone who could have had any connection to these crimes, and soon they received their first leads. Several neighbors of the victims reported seeing a suspicious white man with dark, thick hair near their houses. Although this description was quite superficial, police located several matching men and investigated them, but it led nowhere. But there was a serious problem. Diana couldn't speak or remember anything, and according to the doctors, her brain needed some time to recover, functioning at the level of a 6-year-old child. Around the same time, another attack happened in Tustin. An unknown assailant broke into the apartment of a 24-year-old woman, struck her several times with a piece of wood, and sexually assaulted her. Tragically, the victim died, and the police once again failed to catch the culprit. Diana spent several more days in the hospital, and her mind began to gradually return to normal. However, she had almost completely lost her memory and still couldn't recall even her parents. Doctors said her memory might eventually return, but warned her family not to recount anything to her and to allow her to remember everything on her own. Once her life-threatening condition passed, Diana was discharged from the hospital, and her family took her home. Since Kevin needed to work on the military base to pay the bills, they moved in with Diana's parents, who could care for her around the clock. 2 weeks later, another tragic attack occurred in the city with a similar modus operandi, and this time, the unknown assailant killed a 17-year-old girl. After being discharged from the hospital, Diana started attending physiotherapy, and her condition gradually improved. She still couldn't speak or remember what happened to her, but everything suddenly changed 6 weeks after the attack. During a physiotherapy session, the therapist brought up the attack and asked if Diana still couldn't remember who did it to her. To the doctor's surprise, Diana suddenly nodded and pointed to her wedding ring. When Diana's mother came to pick her up, the doctor told her about this, and the mother asked her daughter, "Was it Kevin who attacked you?" And Diana nodded. Right after that, her mother took her to the police station, where she spoke with the lead detective. He asked Diana a few more questions, and she confirmed that she suddenly remembered the moment of the attack, and the perpetrator was none other than her husband. The detective's perception of the case took a sharp turn. Initially, he and his team were convinced that Diana fell victim to the notorious serial offender behind the other assaults. However, new uncertainties arose. Was Kevin the bedroom basher? Residing in the vicinity of the incidents and fitting the description given by multiple witnesses, a white man with dark hair raised suspicions. Alternatively, did Kevin plot to eliminate his wife by masquerading as the elusive assailant? Given the striking similarities in the bedroom basher's modus operandi in each instance, such a scheme wouldn't have been challenging. Investigators put Kevin under surveillance to closely monitor his movements in the hopes of linking him to other attacks. Police spoke with Kevin's friends to gather more information about him. They discovered that Kevin's relationship with Diana was strained, characterized by frequent arguments. This was further confirmed by neighbors who often heard them yelling. Kevin's friends mentioned that he complained to them about Diana's reluctance to be intimate during the final months of her pregnancy. However, when speaking to detectives, Kevin portrayed his relationship with Diana as nearly flawless. Besides that, detectives couldn't gather any additional useful information. Kevin behaved quite normally. He went to work and came back home without lingering anywhere else, and didn't raise any suspicions. The police received results from the lab showing an discovery. Along with the attacker's semen, they found skin particles with blood under Diana's nails. Specialists matched the attacker's blood type to Kevin's blood sample, confirming they were the same. This indicated that Kevin shared the same blood type as the person who attacked Diana. Based on this evidence, detectives formulated the most probable scenario of what occurred on that significant night. Kevin had indeed purchased burgers at a fast food establishment a few miles away from his home. The time on the receipt and the cashier's testimony verified his presence there. Consequently, the detective suspected that he might have assaulted Diana before leaving home, swiftly visited the fast food place to establish an alibi, thus explaining the prolonged 40-minute absence. Regarding motive, detectives theorized that Diana's refusal to engage in intimacy served as the trigger for Kevin's violent actions. Despite Kevin's claim that they had sex hours before the incident, he frequently complained to friends about Diana's reluctance for months. Given the severity of the attack, detectives believe this was Kevin's breaking point. The police re-interviewed Diana, who confirmed she vividly remembered the attack and that Kevin was the one who assaulted her. During the conversation, her mother said they could no longer pretend and live under the same roof as Kevin after that. Detectives decided to arrest him and proceed with legal action. Kevin was arrested at a store to protect Diana's family and to avoid arresting him at their home. He denied the accusations, claiming his innocence. The court preparation lasted 10 months, during which Diana's health improved, allowing her to speak again, though with some difficulty. Multiple doctors confirmed her recovery and deemed her a credible witness. Diana testified in court, confirming that the person who attacked her that night was indeed her husband. Kevin's defense insisted on his innocence, trying to use the fast food alibi, but it wasn't enough against the victim's testimony. In November 1980, Kevin was found guilty of killing his child and assaulting his wife. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Regarding Kevin's possible involvement in other murders and assaults, detectives noticed something interesting before his arrest. 2 more similar crimes occurred in their county, but both victims survived, and the attacker's identity remained unknown. However, after Kevin's arrest, the attacks suddenly stopped. Before that, the bedroom basher committed his crimes quite frequently, sometimes with only a few weeks between them. But once Kevin was arrested, there were no more similar crimes. After the sentencing, Diana filed for divorce, and Kevin didn't try to object. Diana continued to work on her recovery, but it was quite challenging considering the injuries she sustained. Her brain almost returned to normal, but some problems remained with her forever. She partially lost her hearing and vision and still struggled to speak. As for Kevin, he continued to insist on his innocence for years. His time in prison wasn't easy, as other inmates repeatedly attacked him for killing a child, and he ended up in the hospital multiple times. When he had the opportunity to apply for parole, the commission denied it, and over the following years, he received 3 more denials. The main reason for these decisions was that Kevin had never admitted his guilt, which was seen as a lack of remorse. Now, detectives had the opportunity not only to determine if one person was behind all these crimes, but also possibly to identify them. Kevin remained the prime suspect, but when experts obtained the DNA profile of the perpetrator and added it to the database, there was an unexpected twist. All these samples matched another man named Gerald Parker. Parker was arrested in the same year as Kevin. He assaulted a 13-year-old girl in Tustin and was caught shortly after. At the time, detectives did not link this crime to the series of attacks because they had a different pattern. While the bedroom basher targeted victims late at night in their apartments, Parker abducted the girl on the street. Since then, Parker has been serving his sentence in prison and was set to be released in just a few days. After investigators obtained DNA matches for Parker in all the unsolved cases, they also remembered the attack on Diana, although this crime was considered solved. Detectives still considered its connection to the other similar cases highly likely. Now they understood that Kevin definitely wasn't the serial killer, leaving them with just one question: did he really attack his wife? During those years, Parker served at the same military base as Kevin and also owned a dark-colored van. As we recall, on the very first day, Kevin told the police that he saw an African-American man in front of their house walking near a dark van. This made detectives wonder, what if Parker was behind the attack on Diana? The local prosecutor visited Kevin in prison and informed him of the progress in the investigation of the bedroom basher murder series. He then asked Kevin to provide a direct sample of his DNA for analysis. Kevin, who had been trying to do this for years, immediately agreed. While experts conducted the analysis, Detectives went to see Parker in prison. At that point, they hadn't yet charged him with the series of attacks because they needed time to prepare such a complex case. Nevertheless, the police decided to talk to the suspect, hoping he might give them a confession. Parker began to deny his involvement in the series of crimes, so detectives shifted the conversation to the attack on Diana. Before questioning him, they reviewed Parker's case and found something interesting. After his arrest for assaulting the girl, he told the police that military service was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Detectives decided to use this to their advantage and questioned how he could let another soldier take the blame for his crime. They continued pressing Parker, appealing to his loyalty to the military, until he suddenly said that another person was indeed serving time for the murder he committed. He continued admitting that on that night, he did indeed drive to Kevin's house in his van. His plan was to roam the neighborhood, peering into ground floor windows as he had done many times before, looking for his next victim. But this time he heard screams from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and a man came out onto the street. Parker noticed that he didn't lock the door, waited for a few minutes, then entered the apartment and assaulted Diana. He also said that he didn't know her husband since they had different duties on the military base. Parker also confessed to the other crimes, admitting to 6 murders and 3 non-lethal attacks. After the police obtained his confessions, DNA results proved Parker's involvement and Kevin's innocence. The prosecutor promised to overturn his sentence as soon as possible, and a few days later, Kevin walked free after spending 16 years behind bars. The twist in this case caused a widespread outcry. It wasn't just because an innocent man spent nearly half his life in prison for someone else's crime, but also because it took so long for the police to establish the real killer's identity. However, that wasn't the last twist in this case. When Kevin was released, the state of California agreed to pay him $10,000, which was a relatively small amount of money, even for those times. Several years later, he got additional compensation of $100 for each day spent in prison, totaling $620,000. But the story didn't end there. Despite Kevin's full exoneration, Diana refused to believe in his innocence. Up until that point, she had claimed Kevin was the only one who attacked her. After biological data from her body matched Parker's DNA, Diana came up with a new version of the stories. She claimed that on the night in question, Kevin attacked and assaulted her before leaving, and then Parker entered the apartment and did the same to her. Parker himself repeatedly stated that when he entered the apartment, the woman was simply lying on the bed without any visible injuries or signs of distress. He also claimed that he was the one who struck her on the head. Diana's family proposed another theory, suggesting that Kevin might have asked Parker to commit the crime, which is why he left the house that night, leaving the door open. However, Parker continued to insist that he didn't know Kevin. There were numerous people on the military base, many of whom didn't know each other personally. Besides, such a version would imply that Kevin should have known Parker was the serial killer to ask him something like that, which he vehemently denied. Kevin also denied any connection with Parker, insisting he would never harm Diana, let alone their unborn daughter. He maintained that he left the door unlocked simply because he didn't want to return for the keys right after the argument with his wife. He also added that he still blames himself for that decision. Diana insists on her version of events to this day, and there could be a simple explanation for that. The trauma she endured as a result of the attack had a profound impact on her brain. When she emerged from the coma, doctors warned all her relatives not to tell her what had happened, as her brain could accept any information as true, and she would believe such memories to be accurate and real. It's worth noting that even at the time of Kevin's release, 16 years after the incident, she continued to experience serious difficulties, such as struggling to process fast speech, indicating that the consequences of the trauma had an irreparable impact on her brain. It cannot be ruled out that the trauma is the primary reason for her conviction of Kevin's involvement. As for Parker, In 1999, he was sentenced to death, but this sentence has never been carried out. After many years of waiting in prison, California imposed a moratorium on executions, so Parker continues to serve his sentence behind bars to this day. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lori Vallow. The case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, often to as the Doomsday Spouses, highlights crimes driven by extreme religious beliefs. Such incidents are not rare in criminal practice. Statistics show that over 100,000 people worldwide fall victim to religious fanatics annually. These victims frequently do not align with the fanatics' orthodox views. A few years ago, the disturbing of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell shocked the world and remain unresolved to this day. Media outlets across various countries have covered their story, leaving many horrified and puzzled. Tragically, 5 members of their own families, including 2 children, became victims. Currently, legal proceedings against these individuals are ongoing. They face capital punishment for their heinous acts. Despite this, they deny their guilt and hope to escape severe punishment or receive minimal sentences. Let's start from the beginning to try to understand this horrifying and complex story. How did people who claim to have found God completely lose their sense of humanity? Chad Guy Daybell was born on August 11, 1968 in Provo, Utah. He grew up in a simple, humble family and was known as a quiet, shy child. As a student, Chad was average. He had no notable academic or athletic achievements and was self-conscious about his weight. After finishing high school, Chad enrolled at Brigham Young University in Utah with some difficulty, but ultimately graduated in 1992 with a bachelor's degree in journalism. During his college years, he married Tammy Douglas, a modest girl, and they quickly had 5 children, sons Seth, Mark, and Garth, daughters Emma and Leah. Post-graduation, Chad worked as an editor at a local daily newspaper while balancing his role as a young father. Despite the family's ongoing financial hurdles, he took on additional roles as a night watchman at a small church and as a grave digger at the nearby cemetery. Tammy, focusing solely on household chores and raising their children, did not work outside the home. This left the family struggling to make ends meet. Recognizing the need for a change, Chad chose to apply his journalism education by writing a religious-themed book. In 1999, his first work was published. It turned out to be a collection of religious stories or fantasy narratives with religious themes. Surprisingly, the book became popular and earned him a reasonable amount of money. Given this new income stream, Chad promptly resigned from both his cemetery and newspaper jobs to focus entirely on his writing career. About 18 months later, he published another book titled 1 Foot in the Grave. This popular work detailed his experiences as a gravedigger and explored topics such as death, the afterlife, and soul reincarnations. In 2004, Chad founded his own publishing company, Spring Creek Book Company, which allowed him to self-publish his works. His books often reflected his beliefs about the imminent end of the world and Judgment Day. Over time, some observed that Chad's religious beliefs grew more extreme. He published numerous fiction and popular science books imbued with religious themes and started conducting podcasts along with audio and video lectures. These were aimed at helping individuals prepare for what he called the second coming of Christ. Chad described himself as an apocalyptic writer, claiming he could foresee the future and hear voices of the deceased delivering prophecies intended exclusively for him. About Lori Ryan Vallow was born on June 26, 1973 in Loma Linda, California, a picturesque city indeed. She grew up in a big family that included 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked tirelessly to provide for their large brood. From an early age, Lori had a particularly close bond with her brother Alex. They shared a trusting relationship where Alex consistently stood up for Lori and protected her throughout their upbringing. Lori, during her school years, emerged as a remarkable beauty with no lack of admirers. An attractive and charismatic blonde with a slender figure and a captivating smile, she enjoyed being the center of attention. She was known for her spirited and adventurous personality, In the spring of 1992, at the age of 18, Lori married her high school sweetheart, Nelson Anes. They had begun their relationship in her senior year. However, the young couple soon realized they were not ready for family life and had rushed into marriage. Their marriage dissolved within a year, and they did not have any children together. By fall 1995, Lori remarried, this time to a man named William Leah. A year later, they welcomed a son named Colby. Sadly, their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years after Colby's birth. In early 2001, Lori entered into her third marriage with Joseph Anthony Ryan. He officially adopted Colby from Lori's previous marriage. A year after their union, they had a daughter named Tylee. This marriage also collapsed by 2005. Notably, soon after her divorce from Joseph, an incident occurred when her ex-husband came to visit the children. He was assaulted by Lori's brother Alex, who claimed he was defending his sister's honor as Ryan had allegedly insulted her. As a result, Alex Cox received a fine and served a short prison term. After divorcing her third husband, Lori met Charles Anthony Vallow and married him in February 2006. Despite the significant age difference, Charles being 17 years her senior, it did not create any obstacles for them. Charles had been previously married and had 2 teenage sons from past relationships, Zachary and Nicholas. The couple initially resided in Nevada with Lori's children from previous marriages, while Charles's sons visited during holidays or weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided stable income to support the family. Although Lori did not pursue further education nor work professionally, Charles never reproached her for it. In 2014, the couple officially adopted a young boy named Joshua Jackson, often referred to as JJ Vallow. JJ was Charles's grandnephew and had autism, necessitating expensive therapy that his relatives could afford. Toward the end of 2014, the family decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically to the island of Kauai. By this time, both Colby and Charles's older children were adults living independently. Thus, the Vallow family relocated to the island as a group of 4: Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. The family settled in a well-known tourist area and decided to open their own beach bar. They specialized in fresh juices, smoothies, refreshing drinks, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite their efforts and Charles's experience in trade, coupled with the availability of raw materials, the business quickly failed due to intense competition. Around this period, Lori developed an interest in religious literature and was particularly drawn to a series of books titled Standing in Holy Places by Chad Daybell. She became so captivated by Daybell's views and thoughts that she appeared almost obsessed with his ideas. Lori purchased all his works and read them daily. In 2016, the family had to leave Hawaii and return to the mainland United States. They settled in Arizona. While Charles worked hard to provide for the family, Lori increasingly immersed herself in religion, gradually drifting away from reality. By October 2018, Lori attended an event with her close friend Melanie in a neighboring town called Preparing a People for the Second Coming of Christ, led by Chad Daybell. As a dedicated fan and follower of Daybell's teachings, Lori was thrilled at the opportunity to meet him in person. She sat in the front row with her eyes fixed on Chad. He also noticed her among the audience. After the event concluded, when Chad decided to personally engage with his followers, Lori stayed behind as expected. She listened intently to everything he said and even asked if she could touch his hand. Upon doing so, Daybell looked into her eyes and claimed that they had been husband and wife in 7 previous reincarnations. Following this encounter, Chad and Lori exchanged contact information and began communicating daily. A few weeks later, when Lori's husband went to Nevada for work, she invited the preacher to hold a gathering at her home. On that day, about a dozen people gathered at the Vallow residence, discussing God, Judgment Day, and the Second Coming. Lori and Chad also agreed to collaborate on preparing people for the imminent judgment. The pair began conducting podcasts devoted to this event, leading sermons, and writing articles. Lori became increasingly detached from reality and her family. Charles unfortunately did not immediately notice this change. He thought it was just a temporary obsession that would soon pass. By the time he realized how far things had gone, it was already too late. Soon after, Lori began talking about dark spirits and zombies. She told family and friends that she was chosen by God for a special mission. Part of this mission involved destroying dark spirits, demons, and all evil. Charles's attempts to bring his wife back to reality failed. More so, she began to see him as one of the dark entities that needed to be destroyed. By the end of 2018, the marriage between Lori and Charles Vallow was on the brink of collapse. In February 2019, during Charles's week-long business trip, Lori changed all the locks in their shared home. Upon his return, Charles found himself locked out of his own house and noticed his personal car, the family truck, was missing, and discovered that a substantial amount of $35,000 had been withdrawn from his account. One day, Charles loudly called out for his wife and tried to enter the house. Lori, in a frenzied state, rushed outside, hurling threats and curses. She screamed that her husband's soul had long died and his body possessed by a demon, repeatedly exclaiming, "I don't know who you are and what you've done with my husband." Without hesitation, Charles went to the police station and reported Lori for theft and obstruction to his home and children. He expressed concerns about her threats of physical harm against him, leading to the issuance of a protective order. A court order was issued prohibiting Lori approaching Charles. The statements Charles made that evening were documented as part of standard procedure. He spoke about his wife's excessive religious fervor, her belief in an imminent end of the world, and her tendency to classify people as either light or demonic beings. The officers, while asking clarifying questions, openly mocked him, but still issued the protective order. The next day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. His lawyer noted that Charles was concerned about the well-being of JJ, who required special care. He knew his mother and sister would responsibly manage the insurance payout and take care of JJ if anything happened to him. As for Tylee, her stepfather had not legally adopted her and couldn't include the legally unrelated minor in the documents. A few months later, Mr. Vallow made the regrettable mistake of revoking the protective order, hoping to reconcile with Lori and save their marriage. He began visiting his ex-wife's home, missing the children, and remained hopeful for a family reconciliation. On July 11, 2019, Charles was fatally shot twice in the chest when he arrived to see his children. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, called emergency services and confessed to the shooting, claiming self-defense. He alleged that Charles attacked him first with a baseball bat. In response, Alex drew a pistol and fired twice without aiming. The incident was witnessed by the homeowner and children. Their testimonies were somewhat consistent. The court ruled it an unintentional killing in self-defense. Notably, Alex's head injury was minor, despite Charles's background as a former baseball player capable of inflicting severe harm with a bat. The same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori threw a party at the house with music, numerous guests, and a poolside disco, right where her husband had been shot and where traces of blood were still visible. She didn't arrange for his funeral or inform anyone about the incident. Charles's sons, mother, sister, and other relatives only learned about his death a week later when his unclaimed body was still in the morgue. This marked the beginning of a series of mysterious disappearances and fatalities. Shortly after her husband's demise, Lori sold their Arizona home. Along with her children, she relocated to a town called Rexburg in Idaho. They settled close to where Chad and his wife Tammy lived. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, also moved with them and settled in the same housing complex. Lori enrolled her son in a school for children with special needs. However, her 16-year-old daughter Tylee did not attend any educational institution. She was seldom seen outside, leading many neighbors to be unaware of her existence. Around this time, Lori referred to her daughter as a dark entity during a phone conversation with a friend. On September 8, 2019, the children, their mother and Uncle Alex, went to Yellowstone Park, where Chad Daybell joined them. Several photographs from that trip show Tylee, but after that day, she was never seen alive again. On September 24th of the same year, Lori withdrew her son's documents from the school, claiming he would be homeschooled henceforth. The 7-year-old boy also was not seen afterward. Less than a month later, on October 19th, Chad's 49-year-old wife, Tammy, passed away suddenly. According to Chad, she had a cold with a cough and presumably died from respiratory failure in her sleep, with no signs of violence on her body. Her death was ruled natural. Chad categorically refused an autopsy to definitively determine the cause, a decision that oddly raised no suspicions at that time. Following his wife's sudden passing, Chad received approximately $500,000 in insurance payouts. 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori traveled to the Hawaiian Islands, where they officially married in a beachside ceremony. This event came as a total shock and surprise to Daybell's children, who were still mourning their mother and couldn't comprehend their father's actions. Upon returning to Arizona, the couple lived together and misled others by claiming Lori's children were with relatives, or even asserting she had no children at all. They also rented a small unit at a local storage facility, where they later moved all the belongings of the children, as if they had never existed in the home. Another month later, on December 12, 2019, Alex Cox died suddenly in his home. The cause of death appeared to be a heart attack. At his insistence, no autopsy was conducted, and the incident was deemed natural. As time passed, more people persistently questioned Lori about the whereabouts of her children. She skillfully lied to neighbors and acquaintances, but it was more complicated with relatives. Her eldest son, Colby, who had little contact with his mother after moving away, tried earnestly to reach his younger sister. Initially, Lori answered from her daughter's phone, pretending to be Tylee, but Colby soon sensed something was amiss. Meanwhile, Charles's relatives demanded access to JJ. They wanted to take the boy for holidays or weekends, or simply talk to him on the phone. Lori consistently refused or made up absurd excuses. Eventually, the boy's grandmother reported his disappearance to the police, and soon after, Colby also approached the police to find his younger sister. When law enforcement officers knocked on Lori's door and asked her to bring the children for a conversation, she lied that they were visiting relatives. This information proved false, and the police returned to her home. They gave her a week to appear at the police station with the children, but instead she and her husband fled to Hawaii again. On February 20, 2020, Lori was arrested on the island of Kauai and taken back to Arizona. A search was conducted in her and Chad's home, but neither the children nor any signs that they had been there were found. Now her husband Chad, who had been defending her and insisting she had no children, was also under suspicion. It was only on June 9th that police discovered human remains buried in the backyard of the couple's home. Forensic analysis revealed that they were the bodies of Tylee and her younger brother JJ. Chad was immediately detained for concealing evidence and complicity. The authorities then decided to exhume the bodies of Tammy Daybell and Alex Cox to establish the true causes of their deaths. In both cases, traces of chemicals capable of inducing heart failure were discovered. This led to the conclusion that these individuals did not die naturally. The trial process for the spouses began in January 2021. They were charged with conspiring to commit first-degree criminal acts, grand theft through deceit, and insurance fraud. Additionally, the demise of Charles Vallow was reclassified from self-defense to premeditated criminal action. Witnesses in court testified that Lori referred to her children as dark entities and promised to save their souls. There were speculations that the deaths of 16-year-old Ty and 7-year-old JJ might have had ritualistic elements. Notably, the adolescent girl's body was partially burned. Weeks before this, Chad had sent Lori an email rating people where he assigned Tylee, the girl, a 2 as a dark spirit. Given the totality of the charges, both spouses faced the possibility of capital punishment. However, in May 2021, Val's defense team succeeded in having her declared incompetent, halting the trial process. Simultaneously, all 5 of Daybell's adult children insisted on their father's innocence, believing he was framed by Lori and Alex. In 2022, after treatment in a psychiatric facility, Vallow was deemed fit to stand trial again and answer for her actions. In March 2023, the judge ruled out capital punishment as a sentence for her, a decision still being contested by the prosecution. In July of that same year, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The trial against Chad continues, and he still faces the prospect of capital punishment. It is worth noting that this story inspired the book When the Moon Turns to Blood by investigative journalist Lily Sewell. Brad Sickett came into this world on March 3, 1976, in the quaint town of Kingman, Kansas, USA. As the only child of Janet Sickett and her husband, whose name and details from his previous marriage remained strictly confidential, Brad had an interesting family dynamic. Janet had another son, Robert, from her previous marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Sickett family had deep roots in law enforcement, resulting in a household characterized by strict discipline. Though information about Brad's childhood is scarce, it is documented that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was tall and sturdy, traits that enabled him to pursue wrestling and bodybuilding during his high school years. His dedication to physical fitness soon paid off, as he excelled in various inter-school tournaments, often securing first place. This success turned him into a star wrestler and a notable figure within his school. At 16, while competing at a major wrestling event in the Kansas City Coliseum, Brad met a girl named Vashti Forrest. Born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Seward County, Vashti was Julie Hostler and Clinton Forrest's third child. She had an older brother named Rich and an older sister named Catherine. A younger sister named Tyler completed their family. Vashti possessed a noble spirit and enjoyed the affectionate support of her siblings, especially Catherine and Rich, who treated her with special care. In contrast, Julie wasn't particularly affectionate and often verbally abused her children. Despite these challenges at home, Vashti's outgoing personality earned her a large circle of friends. Though she received much love from those around her, Vashti struggled with self-esteem issues. She didn't feel beautiful or intelligent enough, and often sought approval from others. This quest for approval sometimes undermined her confidence. Nonetheless, Vashti became a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team, a role she loved passionately. She never missed any matches, which led to her fateful encounter with Brad at one such event. Brad immediately caught Vashti's eye. She was deeply attracted to him from their first meeting. He instantly asked her out, fascinated by his boldness. The girl yes, and they both felt it during that initial meeting. From then on, they became inseparable. After graduation, the girl went to the University of UO, and the guy honored his family traditions by joining the police academy. However, during this period, they spent less time together, which profoundly affected Brett, who was already starting to show signs of a controlling and irascible nature. His increasing jealousy eventually became too much for Vashti to handle. Tired and overwhelmed, she decided to end the relationship. The breakup was neither violent nor traumatic. Both went on with their lives. After graduating from the police academy, Brett joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, just 50 kilometers from Kingman. Despite time passing and achieving career milestones, he couldn't forget Vashti. Deep down, he still loved her and never gave up the hope of reuniting with her. When an opportunity presented itself, he visited her and shared how regularly attending church had transformed him into a new man through his faith. Brett's words appeared sincere to Vashti, perhaps due to faith or genuine love, leading her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brett didn't want any delays. He informed her family of his intentions and asked for her hand in marriage. Her parents, Julie and Clinton Forrest, were delighted by this news. They believed Brett and Vashti made a wonderful couple and anticipated a happy marriage. The wedding took place in 2004. Brett and Vashti settled in a peaceful neighborhood in Kingman, where they made new friends, including Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to barbecues in his garden. It seemed like the perfect setting for establishing their new home. However, sometimes Vashti noticed that Brett's unpleasant side resurfaced sporadically. problems cropped up repeatedly due to his dominant disposition. When Vashti became pregnant, though, these differences seemed to fade away temporarily. In fall 2006, their first son Brandon was born. 2 years later came another son named Bronson. The experience of recent parenthood brought about a realization for both of them. The inherent risks associated with Brett's job as a police officer required careful planning for their children's future welfare if one of them were ever absent. After thorough consideration and analysis of their situation, they chose guardianship arrangements for Brandon and Bronson should it ever become necessary. Brett's brother, Robert, worked as a trainer at the police facility in Vashti. Meanwhile, she dedicated herself fully to raising their children and managing household chores. In her spare moments, she penned down her feelings in a diary. Although Brett was a loving and devoted father, his behavior could be somewhat rough with the children during playtime, often treating them like adults. Even though Brett's violent tendencies appeared controlled, it seemed they were waiting to break free. One day at work, Brett used excessive force to subdue an inmate by slamming his head against a concrete wall. The victim sustained a fractured skull and brain damage and died a few days later. Brett faced a lawsuit for excessive use of force, but received full support from his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing him of all charges. Brett did not show remorse. Instead, he admitted to colleagues that he enjoyed violence, especially when punishing those he deemed bad people. Later on, Brett and another officer forcibly subdued a defendant who had lost control and resisted removal from the courtroom for contempt of court. This action drew praise and resulted in both officers receiving a bronze medal from the sheriff for their meritorious behavior. Despite Vashti's love for her children, she still had career aspirations. Recognizing the emptiness she felt inside, she sought and secured employment as the new human resources manager at Vito's communications company. Brett took this development ambivalently. Ideally, he wanted his wife to focus solely on household duties and the education of their children, Brendan and Bronson. It wasn't long before he began to complain about Vashti spending too much time at work, a role he didn't accept her having in the first place. Consequently, their arguments increased significantly. For the sake of their children's well-being, Vashti made extensive efforts to mend their marriage, but felt it was all in vain. She had an intuition that this situation would end badly. With the aim of resolving their conflicts, Vashti and Brett began seeing Connie Sodman, a clinical social worker, during initial sessions. Vashti expressed feelings of profound loneliness and isolation, considering couples therapy as a potential last effort to salvage their marriage. However, when she broached the topic of divorce, Brett became extremely upset, resulting in weeks of psychological harassment. He threatened to kill her if she attempted to leave, claiming he could manipulate her death to appear as a suicide because of his position as a police officer. He even mentioned the possibility of burning down their home to destroy any evidence. In the days that followed, Brett had a one-on-one meeting with Kai, in which he declared furiously that if Vashti continued pursuing divorce, he would ensure she never saw their children, Brendan or Bronson, again. He further vowed that he wouldn't hesitate to take them out of the country. In early 2011, Brett transitioned from patrolling the streets to becoming a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashti began feeling much better than she had in recent years. She continued therapy and implemented healthy changes such as exercising regularly and improving her diet. The decision to divorce gradually became more definite for Vashti. While she felt sadness about the end of her marriage, she predominantly experienced relief and optimism regarding her future. To enhance the effects of physical activity, she started taking an appetite suppressant, despite knowing it might have side effects like depression. Within a few months, Vashti's social life became very active. She expanded her contacts at work and met someone she found attractive. She confided in her older sister Kathleen about her fears concerning Brett's discovery of her plans due to potential repercussions. Vashti also spoke candidly with her coworkers about various threats from Brett. During this time, Brett discovered Vashti was keeping a personal diary without her knowledge and took it to his office to scan and print some pages. He spent considerable time researching information on suicides, fire-related injuries, homicides versus suicides, and their causes. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti attended a final individual session with Kai due to concerns about how Brett would respond upon receiving the divorce petition. Together, they developed a protection plan for herself and their children. When the man received the papers, Brett arrived at his office on the morning of 29th. To his surprise, he found an envelope containing divorce papers. After lunch, he discovered a projector in the pantry. He used it to project handwriting from Vash's diary, traced it, and then wrote a goodbye note to his children. At same time, Brett printed out documents on how to kill a person and pass it off as suicide. He then asked the maintenance staff how best to dispose of computer hard drives. After researching their recommendations, Brett used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained scanned images. Following this, he threw the waste into a dumpster. Later on, Brett drove to a convenience store and bought gasoline, which he loaded into his van. Several hours later, he pleaded with Vashti to let him spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children. The man promised to leave the next morning. Although they discussed joint finances, Brett again begged Vashti to change her mind about the divorce. However, when he saw she was determined to proceed, he soon renewed his threats. Exhausted from fruitless arguments, Vashti retired to her room to sleep while Brett stayed downstairs on the couch. Around 3:15 a.m., he went upstairs with a gun in his hand and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake watching television heard the shot, but did not pay much attention. Meanwhile, Brett placed the next to Vashti's lifeless body and staged the scene to fake a suicide. He then doused the hallway and bedroom with gasoline and took her cell phone, calling himself from it. Subsequently, he took Brendan and Bronson to a safe house. When everything was ready, he started the fire. The flames quickly engulfed the main room and caused cartridges still in the chamber of the gun to start firing. Neighbors woke up startled at around 3:45 a.m., initially thinking there was a shooting. By 3:57 a.m., 911 operators received a desperate call from Brett, who said that his wife had shot herself. When emergency responders arrived on scene, they found the first floor of the house burning with Brett outside in Vashti's car, along with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was in the house, and Brett replied that his wife was still inside. He further claimed that Vashti had shot herself due to depression, but had asked him beforehand to take their children somewhere safe. He stated that although he tried to save her, smoke and fire prevented him from doing so. When firefighters managed to control the flames, they found Vashti's body in the master bedroom. There on the bed, just below the body, investigators found a .44 caliber revolver with the barrel toward her feet and a 5-gallon container of gasoline lying in the middle of the bed. That morning, Brett called Kai and explained what had happened. He was upset and even expressed his guilt, noting that he felt responsible for bringing his wife to this tragic end. In front of his co-workers, he maintained his CB by repeating the same details he shared with investigators. 2 days later, officers discovered Vash's diary in her car. On the last page was a handwritten letter and suicide note taken in for forensic examination. The forensic report determined Vash died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head. She also sustained gunshot wounds to her torso and thigh. Blood and lung tests were negative for smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide, normally present in fire victims. The burns on her body prevented the examiner from concluding if it was homicide or suicide. Despite Brett's threats about committing a perfect crime making it look like suicide to avoid punishment, things didn't go as planned. Police soon noticed inconsistencies in Brett's story. For instance, there were no signs of dirt, blood, or wounds on him. Another inconsistency was the position of the gun with its barrel pointing downward. This raised questions about the alleged suicide. David Fetty, a special agent with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, questioned how the weapon ended up under the body. He confirmed that if Vash had shot herself in a horizontal position, the weapon would have fallen to the floor. If she had done it sitting up, it would have remained on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet did not support that Vash shot herself behind her right ear. Due to these discrepancies, David decided to dig deeper into the case. Further investigation led officers to discover documents detailing how to kill someone and make it look like suicide. While analyzing Vash's diary entry, they noticed a discrepancy in handwriting compared to her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarley concluded that the note was forged. Witnesses also reported seeing Bratt destroying hard drives a day before Vash's death. Testimony from a neighbor indicated hearing a fatal gunshot at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Bratt called 911. This confirmed David Fetty's suspicions about play. On May 13, 2011, police arrested Brad. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 additional charges of endangering his sons. Brendan and Bronson were subsequently placed in the care of Kathleen. During questioning, Brad described Vashi as not being the cheerful and balanced woman she portrayed herself to be. On the contrary, she suffered from insecurity and depression due to their rocky marriage and threats he made about taking the children away. Brad also added that after filing for divorce, Vashi felt deep depression and remorse. Consequently, she set a fire and shot herself. Despite these claims, police didn't believe him. The trial commenced on June 10, 2013. During opening statements, Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley presented her perspective to the jury and argued that no one knows better than a police officer that fire destroys evidence. When questioned about a projector, Brad stated he had used it to demonstrate to cadets how to create a fake security scenario through a real-life exercise. A forensic document examiner testified regarding the forged letter and burnt hard drives. Concerning these items, Brad claimed he destroyed them to protect his personal information, not because he needed to hide anything illicit. His attorney, Roger Falk, mentioned that Vashi had suffered from depression since high school and that her condition worsened with diet drug use. Brad's brother Robert also testified in court and supported his brother's claims by confirming that he had observed Vashi feeling depressed and sad in the 2 weeks leading up to her death. In contrast, another witness informed the jury that while Vashi indeed suffered from depression at the start of therapy, it was mainly due to the circumstances of her marriage rather than a clinical mental health issue. Recently, she had been feeling anxious about her future. The account from Rich Vash's brother echoed this sentiment, recounting the emotional turmoil in his nephews' lives. Their innocence had been shattered by Brett, leaving them deprived of the chance to get to know their parents better. Prors portrayed Brett as manipulative, claiming he used his law enforcement experience to distort facts. In response, the defense stuck to its version of the alleged suicide, highlighting that even a seasoned medical examiner couldn't determine who was at fault for the victim's death. Brett, meanwhile, portrayed himself as a loving husband and devoted father, weighed down by his wife's desire to separate. He also accused Kingman County District Judge Larry Solomoto of seeking publicity and launched into a tirade accusing the judge of seeking a ruling against him to gain a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. In the end, the jury found Brett guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Larry sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and added 6 years for other charges because they would be tried consecutively. So, Brett will be eligible for parole after more than 31 years. Judge Larry also considered that Brett did not plead guilty and lied to avoid responsibility and showed no remorse. In 2015, Brett appealed his conviction, but the Kansas Supreme Court denied his appeal and upheld the original conviction. Brendan and Bronson's uncertain future initiated a custody battle between maternal and paternal families. Kathleen filed for custody on grounds that she had already cared for them for 102 days. As neither party could reach an agreement, the custody decision was left to the judge. However, it's important to note that there's been no news yet on the outcome of this custody battle so far.